Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. So today, we are going to go through the definitive history of one of Marvel's most popular characters, Venom. Now, while he initially started off as a villain in Spider-Man comics, Venom has since become one of Marvel's best anti-hero protagonists. Now, we're going to talk to you about his evolution throughout the comics and the really complex storytelling that's currently being adapted for the big screen. Because, in addition to comics, including his own titles, Venom has also become a popular character for merchandise, cartoons, video games, songs, and of course, movies, including his own trilogy starring Tom Hardy. And we're also going to talk with several of the artists who shaped who Venom is, including Ryan Stegman, Mark Bagley, and the Todd MacFarlene. But let's start at the very beginning, when Venom first appeared in comics before he was even Venom, but rather a mysterious new suit for Spider-Man. So the idea of a gritty black costume with enhanced powers for Peter Parker originally did not come from Stan Lee or any of Marvel's writers and editors. Instead, it came from a fan of the comics named Randy Schueller, who entered a competition for aspiring Marvel writers and artists. So this was way back in 1982, and Randy pitched the idea that the Wasp and Reed Richards would create a new Spider-Man costume using the same technology the Fantastic Four uses to mimic their powers. You know, so when Sue Storm turns invisible, her clothes do too, or when the Human Torch flames on, his pants don't catch fire. Now, Randy also envisioned this new suit to enhance Spidey's powers, giving him extra grip to walls. Now, notably, he saw the suit as jet black to give Spider-Man more stealth, although he imagined the spider emblem on the chest to be blood red. Now, Marvel liked the general idea that Randy Schueller had and bought the concept, which would eventually evolve into the Venom that we all know and love. And they bought this for a whopping $220,000? Nope, just 220 bucks, which in 1982 money was still probably not nearly enough.
I count 300. Not enough.
After all, this guy pretty much invented Spider-Man's famous black suit, but hopefully Randy bought himself something nice with the money.
Here, buy yourself something nice.
And he can be happy that his idea brought so many fans so much joy. Now, of course, Marvel used Randy's idea as a starting point, and then the idea grew from there. For starters, they changed the blood red emblem to white, possibly to make it stand out from Spider-Woman's new costume at the time, which went very heavy on the red. Under Marvel editor Jim Shooter, who purchased the concept, artists Mike Zeck and Rick Leonardi designed the original black costume for Spidey. Now, we should also note that several Marvel characters' uniforms were getting redesigns at this time, such as Iron Man's silver and red suit. This is in part because former Marvel artists like Jack Kirby began the process of suing Marvel for rights to these characters. So Marvel wanted to change the original design so artists didn't necessarily come after them and try to claim copyright ownership of Spider-Man. Now, another key concept of the black costume was that it was not fabric at all, but instead a self-repairing organic material. Now, surprisingly, this idea was created by legendary comic writer John Byrne, not for Spider-Man, but for a different Marvel superhero, Iron Fist. Byrne wanted to introduce this idea so that it wouldn't be weird that every time you saw Iron Fist after a fight, his costume was suddenly good as new. This new black suit was finally introduced in 1984 during Marvel's first major crossover event, Secret Wars. While fighting in Battleworld with the other major Marvel heroes, Spidey finds a black glob that attaches to him and replaces his traditional suit. So in addition to being able to repair itself, the suit had some other cool powers, such as the ability to look like regular clothes when Spider-Man would walk around as Peter Parker, and the ability to organically create webs rather than rely on web shooters.
Like, does it just come out of your wrists, or does it come out of anywhere else?
Now, the original Secret Wars storyline has been revisited since then, you know, because comics love retcons.
Yeah, but what are you gonna do?
One interesting piece of trivia that we later found out is that before attaching to Peter, the symbiote initially bonds with Deadpool. Now, Deadpool can immediately sense that the suit is alive, and he puts it back for Spider-Man to find just minutes later. Now, I'm gonna break down the post-credits and all of these possibilities, but first, look at this sweet new Venom merch that I just got out of our basement. We've got this sweet My Little Venom shirt, the Bully Parker, denim, and this Dirty Dancing parody. And you can find links to all of these below. Oh my God! Oh no! Okay, there's a Venom symbiote in the box, and it's trying to take me over. Now, I cannot guarantee if your merch will have a Venom symbiote in it or not, but you can find out by hitting the link below. Don't worry, person. Flame on! Ah, thanks, Doug. And just a reminder to get your sweet Venom merch, check out our links in the description. Now, the actual first appearance of the suit was not in Secret Wars, it was in Amazing Spider-Man number 252. This is because the previous issue saw Spider-Man being whisked off to Secret Wars, and the next issue he returns. So people actually had to buy several issues of Secret Wars to find out where the black suit came from. Now, over the course of several months, Spider-Man slowly realizes his suit is sentient and possibly doing things without his knowledge or consent. This is finally confirmed when Mr. Fantastic Fantastic is able to separate the suit from Peter by using sound waves. They trapped the alien goo so they could study it further, but this left Peter without a costume. He was forced to go home in an old Fantastic Four suit with a paper bag over his head and a kick-me sign that Johnny Storm put on his back. Now, I bring this up because chances are you've seen this Bagman suit before, most likely in Marvel's Spider-Man game. The goo, which we later find out is a symbiote, escapes the lab.
So why is it called a symbiote?
Well, in real life, a symbiote is something that exists in a symbiotic relationship with another being. For example, a lichen, which is two separate species of algae and fungus that coexist together for one another's benefit. Another example of a symbiotic relationship would be like me and Doug.
Yeah, you're my big buddy.
Thanks, man. So the symbiote remains bitter against Peter for rejecting him, which is why Venom will always have an antagonistic relationship with Spider-Man. It escapes the lab and some hijinks ensue that we're not going to get into here, but eventually it finds its most famous host, Eddie Brock. So Eddie was created by David McLarty and Todd MacFarlane, and, after a brief cameo in 1986, made his real debut in The Amazing Spider-Man number 300 in 1988. Originally, Eddie was a reporter who has his reputation ruined after fingering the wrong guy as a serial killer called the Sin Eater. He blames Spider-Man for his downfall since Spider-Man caught the real Sin Eater.
So wait, how did Eddie and the symbiote meet?
Well, Peter rids himself of the symbiote in a church by using the sound waves from the bell. But in the sanctuary of the church, Eddie Brock was suicidal and praying to God, and that is when the symbiote found him, and then the two of them bond over their shared hatred for Spider-Man. But Venom's behind-the-scenes creation was more of a happy accident, because the new artist on The Amazing Spider-Man, Todd MacFarlane, didn't want to draw the black costume.
I had one condition. I'll come and I'll do it, but we got to get rid of the black costume.
But Marvel editorial pushed back. They wanted to keep the black costume, so MacFarlane proposed a compromise.
I'll just take the costume. It's an alien thing, I think. We'll take the costume off Spider-Man, and then we'll put it on somebody else. Done. And so you'll still have your costume. So that was that was me just being an ornery employee saying, no, I won't. I'm not going to draw that version of Spider-Man. The byproduct is you get Venom and then everything that Venom begats from that.
But rather than simply placing the costume on a new villain, MacFarlane wanted to give Venom this inhuman appearance.
So I drew him sort of big and alien-esque looking, assuming he was a monster.
So he was surprised when Amazing Spider-Man writer and Venom co-creator David McLarty decided that Venom would be a reporter named Eddie Brock.
And I was like, what? Eddie Brock? Eddie Brock's like a normal physique, and I did this big giant sort of monster hulking thing.
Now, Eddie Brock is obviously a major character in Earth 616, and he's going through plenty of changes and interactions over the past 35 years, just like Venom. So after Eddie was fired from his job, he became a depressed loner and spent all of his time bulking up and lifting weights, which is why Venom is so jacked. He's a bitter, misanthropic loner who is filled with anger and resentment that's more or less rooted in deep insecurities, but he's also at his core an extremely lonely person, which is partly why he bonds with the symbiote. In Amazing Spider-Man 299, we first see Venom as a set of eyes in the shadows, and we're meant to think that this is Spider-Man greeting Mary Jane as he comes home. But then we see the grin, and it is the closest comics have ever come to giving me a jump scare. When Venom was created, Spider-Man had Marvel's most colorful rogues gallery. His villains were mostly older men, warped versions of the father figure that Peter sought after his Uncle Ben died. All of these villains wanted things: wealth, glory, fame, youth, power. But Venom was different. All Venom wanted was for Spider-Man to die. And unlike other villains, he knew Peter Parker's secret identity. In his first appearance, he terrorized Mary Jane. He later broke the nose of Peter's ex, the Black Cat. He visited Aunt May at her home. He also neutralized Peter's greatest power, his spider sense. Venom could be lurking outside his window or turn invisible like the Predator. Plus, he was massive, looming over Spider-Man like he was the literal shadow of death. But behind the scenes, Venom's creators had no idea that they had just created a new cornerstone of the Marvel Universe.
When you're doing deadlines, you're not paying attention sometimes to like what's happening there. And in all honesty, we've all done the exact same process with 20 other characters we've created that turned into forgettable characters.
But when Venom first appeared as an insert on the cover of Amazing 316, sales skyrocketed.
Fundamentally, it's a very kind of cool design. You took the black costume and Todd just decided, okay, we're gonna get this huge guy in the costume and the teeth, and it's a design that just pulls you in.
I remember when he got popular, I was going, oh man, people are going to start paying attention to it, because because all the big meaningful villains, at least at that point, had been created in the early 60s in Stan Lee's time. And it had been a long time since anybody had done any like meaningful bad guy, right? There'd been meaningful good guys, but no meaningful bad guys. And I go, man, maybe I remember sitting there at some point going, man, maybe Venom might have a chance at being important, right?
And as the years went by, he evolved. In his second appearance, MacFarlane added Venom's fangs and gave him clawed fingertips.
I would think that like monsters should be like dogs and wolves and things like that, that their teeth should be like irregular and that they should be, dirty, and that they shouldn't look like they just came from a dentist, right? It should be a mess. It should be a mess. They should be, creatures, not humanoids, if you will.
And then artist Erik Larsen transformed Venom into an even more grotesque character, further emphasizing the monstrous qualities that MacFarlane had created.
And Erik was so out there when it came to, he just sort of stretched the cartoony aspect of it to the max.
Larsen also gave Venom his seminal drool, but artist Mark Bagley took this salviary dribble a little bit further and made it a very prominent feature. But according to him, he wasn't even inspired to do this by a regular Spider-Man artist.
I get lots of compliments for the tongue and the drool and that sort of thing, the way I draw the character. Because before me, Erik had thrown the tongue in, but it was fairly short. He didn't have a lot of the drool thing. He had some, but I get a lot of compliments for that, and I throw it back to Adam Kubert. Adam had was drawing Venom in, he was teaming up with Ghost Rider and another sorcery character. I can't remember what the hell it was called, but there was this cover that Adam did where Venom's hanging upside down, and the drool is running up his face, running down across his face because he's hanging upside down. And the tongue was there, and it was like, I went, that is a cool image. I need to do that, something like that. And so that's kind of where, that's when I started really kind of, throwing a lot of drool and a lot of tongue and all that good stuff in there.
Now, in the early years, Venom only appeared about once every year, and every single time you felt like Spider-Man was in mortal danger. He did everything Spidey did, but bigger and meaner.
Anything you can do, I can do better.
But Venom refused to harm anybody besides Peter Parker. He didn't harm Mary Jane or the people he thought were Peter Parker's parents. He always had a warped moral code that future writers would exploit to add layers to this character. For years, he was strictly a villain, an antagonist for Spider-Man. When Eddie and the symbiote combined, it looks like a much bigger, nastier version of Spider-Man in the black suit. Now remember, this is the late 80s and early 90s, when big, huge muscles were like really in style in comic books.
Visually, part of the reason for making him big and bulky was that the vast majority of the people that Spider-Man villains that have come up against them were kind of humanoid body shapes, right? They're sort of built like you and I, with flamboyant costumes and power. To me, in its simplest form, that was Spider-Man. And this was Venom. Right? They weren't the same shape.
The sheer size of Venom meant that he always felt like an existential threat to Spider-Man. Now, Mark Bagley is my favorite Spider-Man artist of all time, and it was a huge honor to get to talk to him about Venom because he was one of the very early artists for Venom. Now, Mark Bagley and David McLarty also created the seminal series Venom Lethal Protector, which is where Venom really comes into his own, but we'll talk about that later on. Now, Mark and David also created the second most famous symbiote in the Marvel Universe, Carnage. So we're going to get to Carnage and Lethal Protector in a bit, but first, let's get back to Eddie's relationship with the symbiote. It's really the core of who Venom is and why he's so consistently popular.
Having Todd start off with him, Todd was at maybe the peak of his popularity at the time, or getting there anyway. And so that gave Venom, made him a household name practically, especially in the comic book business, immediately.
Now, Eddie's definitely got his soft spots though, and he's not necessarily a bad guy. Now, of course, we don't find out about this right away. Eddie has evolved as a character over years of comic storytelling. Now, at first, he was mostly seen as a dark mirror version of Spider-Man, basically black suit Spider-Man on steroids, and he was strictly a villain, an antagonist for the webhead. But then along came another supervillain, one that would make Venom almost look cuddly.
Taserface.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your name is
It's Taserface?
No, not Taserface, Carnage. Carnage is another symbiote villain who is pure malevolence. In fact, he was partly created because, as Venom became more and more popular with fans, it became clear that Venom couldn't do all the big bad evil stuff that would turn people off. Carnage, however, could do all that evil stuff and more.
And then all of a sudden it was like he got so popular that they turned him into kind of a quasi good guy, right? Which, I don't know. It wouldn't have been the way. I don't know.
Carnage is the offspring of Venom. Don't worry, we'll get to how the symbiotes reproduce in a bit. Now, when the Venom symbiote broke Eddie Brock out of prison, it left its offspring behind. So this new symbiote attaches itself to Eddie Brock's cellmate, Cletus Cassidy.
He's a serial, and he's fundamentally a serial killer. He's got no sense of moral, and he's a sociopath.
Now, Cassidy had such strong willpower that, rather than bond with the symbiote, he dominated it and used it as a weapon. You can even see this dynamic in the way he speaks. Venom and Eddie always use the pronoun we, whereas Carnage says I.
You are Borg.
No, I am Hugh.
And Carnage is powerful. He quickly becomes one of the toughest villains in Spider-Man's rogues gallery. He also looks different than Venom, who mostly has a cohesive muscular form despite being made of goo. Carnage, on the other hand, is more amorphous, which makes sense given the original name that Mark and David had in mind when they created the character.
At the time, it was going to be called Chaos, and he's just going to be this out of control force of evil and make Eddie Brock look like almost like, he didn't say this, I don't think, but make Eddie Brock look like a good guy. First sketch I came up with, which I think I have, I did the Fibonacci Man. That was called, with the guy with his arms out and the legs out, and so I basically had the red coming from his chest, like his chest was basically red, and red tendrils coming out from there and down his legs and up to his face. And I sent the sketch in, and I think Danny Fingeroth called me and said, "No, I can't do this. It looked like a shotgun wound to his chest." So I went, "Okay, I can't do that." So that's when I kind of came up with the idea of just these swirls all over the body, which made him a lot more difficult to draw when it came to giving him three-dimensionality, because swirls and things like that, unless they're done right, will flatten the shit out of the body, and so it made him difficult to draw well.
Now, Carnage is an incredibly important character in Venom's story. By showing what true evil looks like, it allowed Venom to start transitioning from villain to anti-hero. This basically came to pass in 1993, which saw the publication of both the seminal comic Lethal Protector, which was Venom's first solo series, and the massive crossover event Maximum Carnage.
I thought, man, it's a pretty good trick if you can take this character who's, a killer and vicious and yada yada, and turn him into a quasi good guy. People were freaked out when Spidey shook Venom's hand in that one issue. And they thought, how can you do that? So, it's the worst thing Spidey's ever done, except maybe sign on with Mephisto.
So in Maximum Carnage, Venom actually allies himself with Spider-Man to stop Carnage. It was a brilliant move because fans now got to keep Venom without him becoming too evil to root for, while also getting this brand new supervillain who was unlike anything they'd seen before.
I think he appeals to a lot of people just on a basic, God, he's a badass level. He's I couldn't tell you how many times I had people ask me, just in the first issue he shows up, or second issue, one of the other, I don't remember, but he tosses a baby off a balcony, and Venom and Spidey both jump out to save the baby, and it turns out Venom saves him. But I've had a lot of people ask me to sign that panel or sign that page because I just thought that was so cool because it was so out there. It's kind of very it's very metal.
Now, Venom is no Spider-Man, but he also has a moral code, and for the most part, he will not harm the innocent. He'll even go out of his way to protect innocent people, like when Carnage threw the baby. And we see this moral conscience start to emerge throughout the 6 issues of Lethal Protector, which ran right before Maximum Carnage. The series was one of the most consequential moments in Venom's history, when Marvel Comics began to transition Eddie Brock from an annually appearing Spider-Man villain and into a recurring monthly hero. He would step out from Spider-Man's shadow and no longer simply be the Dark Mirror of Spider-Man.
He is sort of the Dark Mirror in the fact that, he's a vicious killer and doesn't worry about the consequences of what he does. And Peter's got the whole with great power comes great responsibility thing, which I don't think Eddie Brock really had up until later on. Even when we started Lethal Protector, he was still, not too squeamish about squashing, collateral damage.
The story begins after Spider-Man and Venom come to an uneasy truce, where Venom promises to stop committing crimes and moves from New York to San Francisco.
Whatever happened to predictability?
In Lethal Protector, the Life Foundation extracts seeds from Venom to create 5 offspring symbiotes: Riot, Phage, Lasher, Agony, and Scream.
Ooh, Ice Creamville.
No, Screamville.
Each symbiote offspring bonds with a different person and has various powers, and Venom must team up with Spider-Man to stop them. Now, while this seems like a pretty straightforward story, it was notable for really solidifying Venom as a protagonist rather than as an antagonist, and for showing the character would be just as popular and interesting if he wasn't featured in a Spider-Man comic.
Yeah, but Spider-Man does show up.
Well, yeah, you gotta ease people into it, I guess, like when Picard shows up in the pilot for Deep Space Nine. Lethal Protector was also the first story to expand the symbiote mythology. Remember, when Peter found the Black Goo in Battleworld, it didn't come with an instruction book or a backstory. In Lethal Protector, we find out that symbionts produce asexually, kind of like a fungus. It's typically triggered by extreme circumstances, although it's done using fancy schmancy science by the Life Foundation. The parent symbiote doesn't feel any emotional attachment to its offspring like traditional animals do. It's like if you clipped your fingernail, you're not going to be emotionally attached to those clippings.
Especially if your fingernail became an evil baby-tossing supervillain.
Exactly. So that is how symbiotes reproduce. But where do they come from? We got a lot more backstory on the alien species in the comic book crossover Planet of the Symbionts, which came out in 1995. Eddie and Venom are having relationship troubles, basically over who should be the dominant personality. It's similar to the struggle between Banner and the Hulk that we see in Infinity War.
No! Oh, screw you, you big green asshole!
Eddie breaks up with Venom, who is so upset that he unleashes a powerful telepathic scream.
Yeah, I've been there, man. Like when they cancel Glow?
Yeah, I know, it sucked. So this scream attracts a spaceship of symbiotes to Earth, who then invade the planet, taking over randoms and wreaking havoc. Now eventually we find out that they plan to enslave the Earth, just as they've done with countless other planets. Now here we learn that the symbionts are an alien race that take over host bodies across the universe because it's the only way they can feel emotion, and they form a collective hive mind. Now the symbiotes typically consume the host body and control it as a full-on parasite. Now this is a great story development because it makes Venom unique. The Venom symbiote actually prefers to bond with its host rather than to conquer it. Venom originally came from this same pool of symbiotes in its 998th generation. The other symbiotes deemed it insane because it didn't want to use up its host, which is why they imprisoned it on Battleworld so that it would not infect their species with his "can't we all just get along" attitude. So this not only makes Venom stand out as a character, but also fleshes him out and shows just how important his relationship to Eddie Brock is.
On my planet, I am kind of a loser.
So wait, why are they called symbionts if they usually don't form symbiotic relationship with their hosts? Shouldn't they just be called parasites?
Hey, shut up. The invading force of symbionts are eventually defeated by another powerful scream that is only possible if Eddie and Venom fully bond together. Now this is a pivotal moment for the character and represents the two of them finally coming to terms with one another.
Best of both worlds.
Now by the time Planet of the Symbiotes wraps up, Venom is now fully entrenched in the Earth 616 universe as a main Marvel character and is featured in plenty of his own storylines, including Sinner Takes All, Along Came a Spider, and The Hunger. He crossovers with several non-Spidey characters like Punisher, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and the Hulk. Now throughout this time, like all relationships, Eddie and Venom have their ups and downs. One key issue is that in a lot of ways, Venom is just bad for Eddie. Now we spoke with Ryan Stegman, one of the greatest artists to ever draw Venom, who's probably best known for creating the Superior Spider-Man when Doc Ock took over the Spider-Man mantle.
Yes, I do see Eddie as a victim. The symbiote ultimately will give people what they want, and what Eddie wants is to be punished because he feels negatively about himself and the things, in his past. I don't know that the symbiote necessarily wants to hurt him all the time, but I do feel like it's feeding off of what he feels about himself.
So even as Venom is off doing his own stories in the Marvel Universe, there is always this internal conflict within the character, basically because it's really two characters. This makes Venom much more interesting to read and follow, and is probably a good reason why the character has remained popular for so long. So Venom and Eddie separate and come back together more than once, and sometimes when that happens, the Venom symbiote bonds with other characters in the Marvel Universe. This notably happens with Eddie's ex-girlfriend, Anne Wade, who then becomes She-Venom in a dark turn and eventually dies by suicide after being traumatized by her She-Venom experience. Now years later, we find out in a flashback that actually before that happened, she became pregnant with Eddie's son, who is also descended from the Venom symbiote. Eddie eventually finds out about his son, Dylan, and then Dylan bonds with his paternal symbiote and becomes the new Venom for a while. But again, that happens later later on, so don't worry about it for now. The Venom symbiote has also bonded with Matt Gargan, aka the Scorpion, who then joined the Dark Avengers. He bonded with Flash Thompson, who then joined the Secret Avengers, as well as the Thunderbolts and even the Guardians of the Galaxy. Venom has even bonded with Malekith.
Who?
You know, the dark elf from Thor the Dark World that like wanted everything to stay dark.
Oh yeah, I know. Markalith, that guy.
Now, don't think that just because Venom was hopping from host to host that Eddie Brock was keeping to himself. At one point, Eddie was dying of cancer, which was when Venom abandoned him for Scorpion. Eddie was then healed by Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative. Now, a side effect of Mr. Negative's powers is that he altered the remnants of the symbiote in Eddie's blood, which then merged with his white blood cells, the part of your immune system that heals you, and then this created the anti-Venom symbiote. As anti-Venom, Eddie can heal people and destroy symbiotes just by touching them. He also neutralizes Spider-Man's powers when he's near him. Anti-Venom is literally the opposite of Venom, with the colors of the suit reversed. He's immune to fire and sound damage, which are Venom's weaknesses. Anti-Venom is not malicious, and he allows Eddie to go from villain to anti-hero to just being a plain old hero. Eddie is in much more control than he ever is when he's bonded with Venom. Now, unfortunately, he is forced to part with his powers to cure the spider virus, which is like a whole other thing we don't have to get into here. And also, Flash Thompson then became anti-Venom too at a later point. Now, all this was really fun. It was a cool way to play with the Venom character and pass the symbiote to other characters in the Marvel Universe. But then in 2018, a new run of Venom comics launched. Writer Donny Cates and artist Ryan Stegman then expanded the Venom mythology in the largest way since probably Planet of the Symbiotes back in 1995. The two of them created Null, one of Marvel's most powerful supervillains, and he was the creator of the symbiote race. Now, Null is an ancient godlike entity that predates even the Celestials in the creation of the Marvel Universe. Null was literally just floating around the ancient void of nothingness until the Celestials created life. So this drove Null crazy. I mean, think about it. You've got all this peace and quiet and wide open space, and then look who moves in next door. Everybody.
There is no path to goodness in him. He doesn't have a sad history. He's just pissed that his solitude was taken away from him. Null, it's like, this is just pure evil and destruction. This guy just wants to be rid of anything and everyone. I think that makes him very threatening.
Null gets his revenge by creating the All-Black, the Necro Sword, which if you've seen Thor the Dark World, you know that it can kill gods. He uses it to decapitate one of the Celestials, who then banish him from their new universe. That decapitated head, by the way, became Nowhere, which you've seen in the Guardians of the Galaxy films. So Null then took the energy from that decapitated head and used it to create the Clintar, which is where all symbionts derive from. Now remember, the symbiotes reproduce by breaking off pieces of themselves to create more symbionts. The Clintar then is the source symbiote from which all others derive, like the Great Link for the Changelings in Deep Space Nine. So Null creates a symbiote armor and starts killing deities with the Necro Sword, but then he crash lands and is taken out of service for a while. In the meantime, Gore the God Butcher finds Null, takes his gear, and then uses it to go off and butcher gods. This is all part of Jason Aaron's great run of the Thor comics. They're fantastic reads. Now, when Null wakes up, he continues his war on the gods. He sends out an army of symbiotes across the universe with himself at the center of the hive mind. The symbiotes absorb and destroy life, or as Null calls it, the light that invaded his darkness. This continues for thousands of years. During medieval times, a dragon-like symbiote attacks a Viking village in an attempt to conquer Earth. The villagers named this beast Grendel, which presumably inspires the tale of Beowulf and the really weird Robert Zemeckis movie with Crispin Glover and Angelina Jolie. Thor and the Vikings defeat Grendel, which breaks the bond between Null and the symbionts scattered across the universe. Some of the symbiotes bond with good people and become good themselves, and decide to rebel against Null. They imprison him in an artificial planet made out of billions of symbiotes, which they call Clintar, which means cage in symbiote-ese. Now, he remained in that cage for centuries until S.H.I.E.L.D. accidentally wakes him up during the Vietnam War when they use pieces of the Grendel dragon to create super soldiers. One symbiote is even temporarily bonded to Wolverine, although obviously that didn't take. Now, in Absolute Carnage, which was also penciled by Ryan Stegman, Carnage becomes more powerful than ever after bonding with a piece of Grendel. He then seeks out every Marvel character that's ever bonded with a symbiote to absorb whatever remnants they may have left. So this epic crossover involves Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Deadpool, Hulk, Iron Fist, and more, and sets up King in Black, which was also done by Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman. After Venom defeats Carnage, Null finally breaks free from his prison and invades Earth, looking to restore the universe back to the darkness once and for all. So this storyline brings in the Avengers and the X-Men and even Blade, and proves that Null is a Thanos-level uber villain for the Marvel Universe. But even more than that, he is still a perfect villain for Venom specifically.
If you go back to the Eddie wanting to be punished and Null wanting to punish everybody. He is into destroying, and he wants to get back to his quiet place, but he also wants to punish everybody. He wants to make them feel, sort of the anguish that he must feel by having his life disturbed, so to speak.
The story ends with Eddie also replacing Null as the center of the symbiote hive mind and as the new King in Black. With Eddie as the King in Black and the ruler of all symbiotes, his son Dylan has become the new Venom, for now. And that's more or less where we are now, at least in the main Earth 616 universe. Now, of course, there are plenty of other Venom variants out there in the multiverse. Take, for example, in the Ultimate Marvel universe. Now, Ultimate Marvel was a line of different comics that ran from 2000 to 2015 that also ran alongside Earth 616. It completely rewrote and reimagined the history and characters from scratch. So the idea was that you could jump right in without needing to know decades of continuity. Now, some things in Ultimate Marvel were very similar to their Earth 616 counterparts, but a lot of things were very different. For instance, Venom. In the Ultimate Marvel universe, the Venom symbiote isn't even an alien, and all that extensive backstory with Null and the Clintar are nowhere to be found. Instead, the symbiote is a man-made biosuit invented by Eddie Brock Sr. and Richard Parker, Peter Parker's dad, and they did this to cure cancer.
Ryan's take on it was that this thing was supposed to be able to cure anything that goes wrong with you by going all over your body and that sort of thing. And apparently he didn't realize that, when he gets into somebody's head, it would go crazy. I started drawing him a little bit more and more exaggerated, like it was not the anatomy of a person or anything, but it was more like this amorphous glob all over me, And later on, as I went, you see like teeth growing out of different parts of his bodies, and because that can happen in tumors and things like that.
Carnage, on the other hand, isn't even the offspring of Venom. Instead, he's created by Dr. Kurt Connors, the Lizard, using Peter Parker's DNA. Now, in this universe, Carnage was the one who killed Gwen Stacy, who then comes back as part symbiote. Now, other Venom variants include a T-Rex that bonds with the Venom symbiote in the Old Man Logan universe. Maybe one day we'll even see that T-Rex Venom face off against Spider-Rex. There's also Venom 2099, who is the half-brother of Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. While it's the Venom symbiote, this incarnation is very much not an anti-hero, but a dangerous, brutal villain. In a what-if story, Venom bonds with the Punisher, which just makes Punisher that much more powerful at violently killing bad guys. In Earth X, Peter Parker's daughter May bonds with the Venom symbiote to become Spider-Girl. There's also Gwenom, which is exactly what it sounds like. Venom merged with an alternate Gwen Stacy. We also see a bunch of variants in the Venomverse storyline, which sees Earth 616 Eddie Brock join with a bunch of multiverse Venoms to defeat a race of parasitic creatures called the Poisons. The Poisons can bond with and corrupt symbionts, and they're a threat to them all across the universe. Eddie defeats the Poisons with the help of variants like Venom Captain America, Venom Doctor Strange, Venom Ghost Rider, Venom Ant-Man, Venom Black Panther, and even a Venom Rocket Raccoon, which has its own Funko Pop. Another variant I just have to mention is the Venom of Earth 92131. Now, this is the same universe as the amazing recent series X-Men 97, and of course, Spider-Man the Animated Series, which ran from 1994 to 1998. This Saturday morning cartoon was airing while Venom was at his most popular point in the comics, and it really helped solidify the character in pop culture. The opening titles to the show even ended each week with Venom's big, gross tongue. This Venom was similar to the one in the comics, and was a symbiote that bonded to Eddie Brock after Spider-Man rejected it. However, rather than finding it on Battleworld, the symbiote arrived on Earth after J. Jonah Jameson's son crash-landed a NASA space shuttle onto the George Washington Bridge. Now, since it was a TV show for kids and not a drawn-out comic storyline, the beats of Peter finding the symbiote, wearing the black suit, rejecting it, and Venom bonding with Eddie all happen a lot quicker than they do in the comics.
That's funny. I give up too. I give up trying to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
But this version of the character is really important because it introduced him to many Spider-Man fans who didn't even read the comics, especially younger ones.
Say aloha!
Also, since this was a kid's cartoon, Carnage, who does appear in the animated series, is toned down from his murderous serial killer origins, although he's still plenty scary.
Think of the damage we can do now, man!
In Earth 92131, Carnage is still the offspring of Venom and still bonds to Cletus Cassidy, but the two of them are actually brought together by Baron Mordo, under orders of Dormammu. This symbiote also appears as Spider Carnage in the series finale of the animated series, and a really emotional ending. So the series finale of the cartoon famously has Madam Web bring about several different versions of Spider-Man to form a multiversal team. Spider Carnage is an alternate Peter Parker that merged with the Carnage symbiote. Now, in the end, these Spider-Men defeat Spider Carnage by showing him an alt-universe Uncle Ben who never died, who reminds him that there's still good within him.
And no matter what, I love you. I love you too, Uncle Ben.
This Spider Carnage then sacrifices himself to save the multiverse. Now, in addition to this animated version of Venom, another version I should mention is the one from the PS5 game Marvel Spider-Man 2, because he played such an important role in the story. Not only that, but the story gives us one of the most different takes on Venom we've ever seen in a mainstream Spider-Man adaptation. For one thing, Eddie Brock is not in the game at all. The symbiote arrives from space via a meteor, kind of like it does in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. It's discovered by Curt Connors, who's working for Norman Osborn, and then the two of them use the symbiote to treat Harry Osborn's Osh-Torrens syndrome. So this gives Harry Venom-like powers, and Harry briefly uses it to be a superhero alongside Peter and Miles Morales. However, the symbiote attaches itself to Peter because it senses that he is much more powerful, and this is how Spider-Man gets his black suit in this universe, kind of in the reverse order that we usually see. Now, the black suit makes Peter more aggressive, and at first he's really drawn in by his enhanced powers. In fact, the game features one of the biggest jump scares I've ever seen in Spider-Man history.
We need to destroy it. Destroy us?
Eventually, though, Peter does resist the symbiote, and then it rebonds with Harry to become this universe's Venom. The game also briefly gives us its version of Scream when Venom's offspring bonds with Mary Jane. So the PlayStation game's Elseworld take on Spider-Man has been really cool over the course of 3 games, showing us a similar yet different cinematic take on the characters, similar to what the Arkham games have done for Batman. So it's kind of a bummer that we don't get to see this universe's take on Eddie Brock, but making Harry Osborn Venom makes a lot of sense. These games have a lot less time to tell the Spider-Man story than the comics or the animated series. So by condensing the Black Suit storyline with characters that already have a personal connection to Peter, namely Harry, Norman, and Curt Connors, it's a really smart move. Now, it'll be interesting to see what this story does with Carnage, who was teased in the game alongside Cletus Cassidy, who in this dimension is a cult leader instead of a serial killer. Now, Venom and Carnage also played big roles in another Spider-Man video game adaptation, which was just called Spider-Man, and came out in 2000 for the original PlayStation, as well as the Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, and a few other platforms. This game's take on Venom was pretty standard, although notably the symbiote was dark blue and not black. It also leaned into how silly and fun Eddie as Venom can be, annoying Spider-Man as the two of them are forced to work together.
We're going to use his computer database.
Ooh, are we gonna surf the web?
Let's just go.
But going way back, another game worth mentioning is Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, which was a side-scroller on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Now, while the game itself is simple, it has a cool story that pretty loyally adapts the story from Maximum Carnage comic books, with Spidey and Venom fighting Carnage alongside many other superheroes. The game also features Shriek, Carrion, Doppelganger, who is a 6-armed clone of Spider-Man, very long story, and Demogoblin, a demon-possessed, super powerful hobgoblin. In fact, I bet a lot of you watching this actually saw ads for this video game in your schools. It was a weird thing. They advertised the video game in schools. Now, the game also had a sequel that even more closely adapted Lethal Protector, but for some reason was called Venom Spider-Man Separation Anxiety. The main reason I mention these games is that they came out in 1994 and 95, during the initial height of Venom's popularity. It showed just how quickly this character took off, getting not 1 but 2 games just a few years after he was introduced in the comics. This also explains why many fans were chomping at the bit for a Venom adaptation on the big screen, which didn't take place until the 3rd Spider-Man movie in 2007. However, even that didn't almost happen, as Sam Raimi, who directed the entire Tobey Maguire trilogy, wasn't all that interested in a Venom storyline. Now, Spider-Man 2 is a huge success and is still considered one of, if not the greatest superhero movie ever made, so like a 3rd film was a given. Sam Raimi and his brother Ivan wrote up a story with Sandman as the primary villain, because Raimi thought that it would be really cool to see on the screen visually.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of Anakin Skywalker, because he loves sand.
I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough, and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Right, so the story wanted to have Peter grapple with what it means to be a vigilante, and for him to discover the humanity and the criminals that he faced. Sandman was retconned to have been the one to have killed Uncle Ben in order for Peter to truly learn about forgiveness. Now, Raimi did think another villain could fit into the story pretty well, and Ben Kingsley was even involved in negotiations to play the Vulture. However, producer Avi Arad insisted that Raimi include Venom because he was so popular and sold a lot of toys. But Raimi was resistant because he didn't have a personal affinity for the character, having grown up with Spider-Man comics before the symbiote ever showed up. He also didn't see any humanity in the character, but once he started working on the character because his boss told him to, he found Venom to have more depth than he realized. Now, interestingly, Eddie Brock was already a minor character in the script. More interestingly, the seeds for Venom were kind of already planted in Spider-Man 2, which features J. Jonah Jameson's son as an astronaut. Remember that in the animated series, the symbiote arrives from space when Jameson crashes his shuttle onto the GW bridge, which would have been a great special special effects spectacle for Raimi's film. However, instead, they opted for the symbiote to randomly crash land on Earth as a meteor with absolutely no backstory, kind of similar to what it does in the PS5 video game. The symbiote then just attaches to Peter, likely sensing his power. It shows how, by cramming Venom into an already fleshed out story, there wasn't really room to do this story justice and everything just felt rushed. So we do get a black suit arc for Spider-Man, where Peter's behavior is corrupted by the symbiote, but it barely lasts for one act of the film. It did, however, famously give us Evil Toby, which was mostly just dancing.
We don't really talk about this.
And nearly killing Harry Osborn. Eddie Brock was played by Topher Grace and is portrayed as kind of a scuzzy tabloid photographer, a mirror version of Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. Instead of the big lug with the heart of gold that Eddie is usually depicted as, he's more smarmy and sarcastic.
What was it you said? I'll never get that picture? There's your hero.
Again, showing him to be a dark side of the Peter Parker from the Raimi films. Now, similar to the comics, Peter rejects the symbiote using sound waves, and then the hostless symbiote bonds with Eddie to become Venom. Also similar to the comics, Venom hates Spider-Man because both Eddie and the symbiote hate Spider-Man. This version of Eddie Brock's career was ruined when Peter Parker exposed him for publishing fake Spider-Man photos that showed him robbing a bank. Now, we don't really get to see much of Venom in this movie, which still mostly focuses on Sandman and the New Goblin. Now remember too that the CGI used to make Venom was still in its early days and very expensive. Raimi's version of Venom is less burly than what we usually get, similar to how this version of Eddie is more toned down and making him look more like an actual dark mirror of Spider-Man. Instead of a deep, growly voice, it's also more shrieky and animal-like.
Never wound what you can't kill.
Which does fit the chaotic nature of the tendrils. In the end, Spider-Man uses sound waves and fire from a pumpkin bomb to destroy the symbiote. Now, a lot of fans were disappointed that, even though they finally got Venom on the big screen, it wasn't the Venom they expected, and that he only showed up for a few minutes of screen time. There were hopes that he would return in Spider-Man 4, maybe alongside Carnage, but obviously a fourth Tobey Maguire movie didn't happen. Yet.
They stole it from me, Carmine! They took it! That was today! Today!
6 years after Spider-Man 3, we got another take on Venom in an interesting unofficial fan film. Now this short film is called Truth in Journalism, and it was shot in black and white. It was written and directed by Adi Shankar, who made other unofficial short films like Power Rangers and Dirty Laundry, in which Thomas Jane returned to play the Punisher. Now the film is shot as a low-budget documentary by French filmmakers in the 1980s, showing the life of Eddie Brock, played by True Blood's Ryan Quanten. Eddie is portrayed as a disgraced and cold-hearted, unhinged journalist, and it's strongly hinting that he moonlights as a vigilante. In one scene, we briefly see him transform into Venom and kill the film crew. Interestingly, Eddie can't immediately transform, but has to concentrate and violently cough up the symbiote to transform. There isn't any backstory about the symbiote or if Venom is a distinct personality, although we see it uses tendrils and has the big, long tongue. And Bullseye makes a cameo near the end. It's a fun little film that's worth mentioning as yet another take on this character. And that brings us to, of course, the Tom Hardy Venom films, the trilogy of Sony movies that finally put Venom front and center on the big screen. And when I say finally, I mean because Marvel had been trying to make this movie happen for more than 20 years before Venom was finally released in 2018. David S. Goyer, who's written Batman Begins and Blade, had written a Venom script all the way back in 1997 that was to be produced by New Line Cinema. Carnage was the villain, and Dolph Lundgren, who already played the Punisher, was in talks to star as Eddie Brock. I mean, the guy is really huge and blonde, so I could definitely see it. Now, the film obviously never happened, and for a while, Sony thought about doing a spin-off Venom film with Topher Grace after Spider-Man 3. Now, this finally fell apart when Spider-Man was rebooted with Andrew Garfield, although interest was renewed in a Venom film after The Amazing Spider-Man started to perform well. Now, at one point, big fan director Robert Siegel and Chronicle director Josh Trank pitched an R-rated film in the vein of Jim Carrey's The Mask. Now, if you've seen Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, you probably think it's for the best that this also never happened.
Traumatized.
Now, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 famously set up the Sinister Six, and Sony was intent on making a wider cinematic Sonyverse that would compete with the MCU. They planned for a film called Venom Carnage to be featured in this amazing verse, and it was to be written by Alex Kurtzman, Robert Orci, and Ed Solomon. Now, the plan was for that to come out after Amazing 3, but it was pushed up after Amazing 2 bombed hard. However, plans changed again once Kevin Feige and Disney negotiated to bring another rebooted Spider-Man into the MCU and to share the rights rights with the character with Sony. This is when Sony planned to make yet another cinematic universe independent of both the MCU and the Andrew Garfield Amazingverse. Based on the success of R-rated films like Deadpool and Logan, Sony considered a darker R-rated movie, and its shortlisted filmmakers included Andrew Wingard, who went on to make Death Note and the Godzilla vs. Kong movies, and they also considered Adi Shankar, the writer of the black and white Venom fan film. Finally, Zombieland director Ruben Fleischer, who was a big fan of the comics, landed the role as director. Now, Tom Hardy was brought on to play Eddie Brock in Venom. He had to drop out of Suicide Squad for Venom, with Joel Kinnaman taking his place as Rick Flag. Hardy said a big reason for taking the role was because his son was a huge Venom fan, although I'm sure that $7 million paycheck didn't hurt. Riz Ahmed was cast as the film's villain, Carlton Drake, although Matt Smith and Pedro Pascal were both considered. Now, Pascal was well known, but he wasn't the gigantic star that he is today. Matt Smith, though, is interesting to note because he later became the main antagonist in Morbius, the second franchise in the SSU.
The SSU?
Yes, it's short for Sony's Spider-Man universe. That's the new cinematic universe that began with Venom. Since Spider-Man was busy making MCU films, Sony instead decided to focus on various Spidey-adjacent characters that had still retained the rights to, giving each character its own film. Now, eventually, Sony hopes to cross all of these characters over, which we'll talk about in a bit. So far, the SSU films include the Venom trilogy, Morbius, Madam Web, and the Kraven film that's been in the can for a while but keeps getting delayed. Now, at first, it was a little unclear where exactly these films fit in with relation to the MCU, but that eventually got sorted out in Spider-Man: No Way Home. Ruben Fleischer wanted to make sure the tone of the film felt distinct from both the MCU and the grimdark DC extended universe. He also felt that in order to effectively portray Venom, you had to go with an R rating to show how violent he could be. You know, what with biting off people's heads and such. However, Sony ended up getting cold feet and insisted the film be PG-13. Supposedly, this was because they wanted to leave the door open for crossing over with the more family-friendly MCU Spider-Man. Now, the film that we got with Ruben Fleischer and Tom Hardy came out in 2018, and it borrows a lot from the comics, including Lethal Protector and Planet of the Symbiotes. It takes place in San Francisco, and the Life Foundation plays a large role. Michelle Williams plays Anne Wayne, and she does bond with the symbiote briefly in the film, but she doesn't really become She-Venom. Like with other adaptations, this origin story completely leaves out Battleworld. Spider-Man doesn't seem to exist in this universe, or at least he's not a known figure, and there is no Black Suit storyline. Instead, the symbionts are discovered in space by the Life Foundation and then brought back to Earth. Now, while it doesn't really matter much, J. Jonah Jameson's astronaut son also appears in the film. Riz Ahmed's character eventually bonds with the Riot symbiote, which was introduced in Lethal Protector and serves as the main villain of the film. A lot of CGI was used for both symbionts, which allowed the film to portray Venom as he was in the comics, a huge, burly beast. Tom Hardy also voices Venom, which makes sense. I mean, after all, he does have a penchant for creating unique voices for comic book villains.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark.
Now, Hardy plays Venom as a gruff but playful monster, and he plays Eddie as awkward, humble, and a well-meaning journalist. But it's a unique take on the character that still doesn't feel too different from the source material. The best parts of the movie are the dynamic between Eddie and Venom, both played by Hardy as a sort of schizophrenic, superpowered odd couple. Hardy accomplished this by recording Venom's lines first and then listening to them in an earpiece that he was wearing. Also, while the film is PG-13, it does a pretty good job of portraying Venom's brutality. Now, obviously, with Venom as the lead, he is the protagonist, and the Venom trilogy leans into the character's anti-hero status, rather than making him a full-on villain. Venom defeats Riot, and the film ends with Venom and Eddie coming to a truce and remaining secretly bonded to fight crime as San Francisco's new Lethal Protector. The film also ends with Eminem's single Venom rapping over the credits. So if you ever wanted to hear Eminem make Venom rhyme with adrenaline and momentum, then we got a song for you.
Yeah, Sony should use my Venom rap song. Goes like this. Hey, my name is Venom, and I'm here to say my goo is black and my morals are gray.
Yeah, buddy, but you're under NDA. You're not supposed to talk about that.
Oh, jeez.
Besides Eminem, we also got a mid-credits scene that introduced Woody Harrelson as serial killer Cletus Cassidy, teasing Carnage for a sequel. Now, fortunately, unlike a lot of post-credits teasers these days,
Blade and Star Fox and Hercules,
Venom 2 did indeed feature Carnage. In fact, the movie was called Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and it came out in 2021. Now, while reviews of the first film were mixed, it made nearly $1 billion, so the sequel was pretty much fast-tracked. Ruben Fleischer said he wanted to save Carnage for the sequel, so the first film could focus on Eddie and Venom's dynamic, which was a smart choice. He also said that it gave the franchise room to grow in the next film, similar to how Christopher Nolan saved the Joker for his second Batman film. Woody Harrelson was also really smart casting. He had previously worked with Fleischer on Zombieland, and Fleischer said Woody's role in Natural Born Killers as a sadistic serial killer already had him in mind for the role of Cletus Cassidy. Ironically, though, Fleischer Fleischer had to drop out of directing the sequel because he was already shooting Zombieland 2. So then they brought on Andy Serkis. Now Andy Serkis is mostly known for his acting, especially his groundbreaking motion capture acting. He's played Gollum, King Kong, Caesar, and while he's played Snoke, he also appeared in live action on Andor to deliver one of the greatest lines in the Star Wars franchise.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sorry, I meant this line.
What's wrong? Oh, sweet.
Now, Andy Serkis helped develop mocap acting into an art form, which is why it made sense for him to direct Venom 2, since both Venom and Carnage were CGI characters. This was the second film he directed after Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. Ironically, however, Serkis decided not to use mocap for Venom, saying that it allowed more freedom for Tom Hardy to play the character. Since Venom is gigantic and doesn't really match Tom Hardy's frame 1-to-1, full CGI was also more practical. However, dancers and actors were used for some motion capture. Serkis said that he wanted to depict Venom as a quarterback who used brute force, and Cletus as an octopus that had idiosyncratic, off-kilter movements. Now at this point, Joker had become another huge R-rated comic book success, so Sony briefly considered making Venom 2 rated R, but then decided to not rock the boat. It made a lot of money as a PG-13 film, so there was no reason to mess with that formula. Like the comics, the film portrays Cletus Cassidy as a serial killer in prison. He bites Eddie and is introduced to the symbiote offspring in this way, which manifests as Carnage just as he's being put to death. The film also focuses on the relationship between Cletus and Frances Barrison, played by Naomi Harris, who were also romantically involved in the comics. As in the comics, Frances is also Shriek, a mutant with sonic-based powers. She allies herself with Carnage in the book Maximum Carnage, but in the movie, they are childhood sweethearts who grew up in an orphanage together before being separated for years. As Carnage, he reunites with Shriek and they go on a rampage together. Meanwhile, Eddie and Venom have gone their separate ways because Venom wants to eat the criminals that they catch. Eventually, they do reunite to stop Carnage, which they do by using Shriek's sonic powers to separate Cletus from the symbiote before they kill them both. Shriek is also killed when the church they're in collapses from the battle. Another character, Detective Patrick Mulligan, is seemingly killed in the climax by Carnage. However, at the end, it's revealed that he has glowing blue eyes and it's likely he is bonded with Toxin, the symbiote offspring of Carnage that first debuted in comics in 2004. Now, Venom: The Last Dance features the King in Black himself, Null, creator of the symbionts, as its main villain. Now, as for Venom, it's kind of unclear what's going to happen next. The film is called The Last Dance, and the marketing seems to heavily imply that this is it. This is the finale for the Venom trilogy. Even though Morbius and Madam Web were flops, Sony still seems intent on making its SS universe a thing, and you can't do a big crossover movie without Venom at its center. And there's also the multiverse factor. The post-credit scene of Let There Be Carnage shows Eddie and Venom taking a vacation to a tropical bar. Suddenly, he's warped to another dimension and sees Tom Holland's Spider-Man on the news. So this was an incredibly exciting tease because it made it seem like Tom Hardy was going to be Venom in Spider-Man No Way Home. That movie also teased 5 different villains in its marketing: Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, Electro, and the Lizard. Spider-Man famously fights a group of villains called the Sinister Six, so it made a lot of sense that Venom was secretly the 6th villain. However, once the movie came out, we realized that that wasn't the case, and that Spider-Man was indeed only fighting 5 villains. Tom Hardy literally sits at the bar throughout the entire events of the movie, and then is sent back to his dimension when Doctor Strange undoes the spell that brought him there in the first place. Basically, Venom's cameo in the MCU was a one-off joke.
No, we just got here! No, not again!
But another connection to the multiverse is convenience store owner Mrs. Chen, who appears in all 3 Venom films. Played by Peggy Lou, Mrs. Chen is friends with both Eddie and Venom, and is hilariously nonchalant about there being a giant symbiote monster living in the neighborhood.
Good evening, Venom.
He says hi.
She also appears as a cameo in live action in Sony's animated Across the Spider-Verse film. Again, she's nonchalant about the Spot suddenly entering her dimension.
You're acting like weird stuff like this happens to you all the time.
Funny enough, the gum the Spot takes in that scene is called Venom Mint. It's also cool that a Venom character appears in the Spider-Verse franchise because Miles Morales' black suit, in a way, is a spiritual successor to the original 1980 Spider-Man suit that started the whole Venom saga. Mrs. Chen's cameo is also another way to show that literally all Marvel properties inhabit the same multiverse, along with Fox's X-Men and Deadpool movies, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films, Sony's SSU, and of course, Disney's MCU. With the MCU headed toward a multiversal epic film in Avengers Secret Wars, that means that Venom could easily show up alongside the Avengers, Deadpool, the X-Men, and Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Even if Tom Hardy doesn't appear in Secret Wars, I think it's still very likely Tom Holland will face off against Venom at some point. Now, it's unclear exactly how Sony will work Spider-Man into their SSU, but with the way the MCU has worked the multiverse saga into its canon, it wouldn't be that difficult to do. Venom has had one of the most incredible arcs of any character in the comics, beginning as an idea written by a fan, that then grew into a way to keep creators from claiming copyright on a character, that then then became one of Spider-Man's seminal storylines and finally became one of his greatest arch-enemies. Marvel Comics took a huge swing when they turned Venom from villain into anti-hero, but great creators over the years have added so much depth to his character that different artists and different media have been inspired by this character ever since. So no matter if it's going to be Tom Hardy or some other actor, I know that Venom isn't going to go anywhere. Well guys, that's the definitive history of Venom. Was there anything we should have talked about that we left out? Let us know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And big shout out to the writer of this video, Jack Piccone. You can find his social links below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.